Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another weekly fighting roundup. And so, if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So, of course, starting with that of the boxing news, and so Fury has announced his retirement. I touched upon this a little bit last week. It was the early part of last week, and Fury has retired for, I believe, the fifth time or fourth time or something crazy like that. I don't feel like any fighter has retired and then come out of retirement as much as he has, but I'm sure the money with the Joshua fight, first of all, will probably get driven up as you know, Fury can use the excuse of him being retired to help raise that price money, that price point for him, even though it's going to be ridiculous numbers already. And second of all, it is just such a huge fight, and so I do believe that it will still happen versus Joshua. I think the retirement is just maybe him trying to grab some more, I suppose, positive attention to an extent after the Usyk loss, him trying to gain more money, him maybe being able to have a little bit longer and have an excuse to have a little bit longer out. Maybe he has fallen out of love with the sport. He might gain that back if Joshua is talking, a lot of shit, I suppose, towards him. But for the moment, he's retired. We'll see how long that lasts. If it is him retired, I think he's had an excellent career, and I wouldn't mind seeing him retired. I feel like the Joshua fight is always going to be there, but it's definitely nowhere near the magnitude in which it once was. And so I could go as a boxing fan, as a British boxing fan, I could go the rest of my life without seeing Fury Joshua at this point in their careers. I'm very, very upset still that we never saw it in the best points. But at this point, I feel like I could kind of just move on without seeing that fight. Barrett versus Dickens, McGrail versus Lane, Fiaz, Crawler, Middle Miss, and Tudsbury will fight February 15th. Eubank will fight McKenna March 7th. Wilder is set to fight Harper in April. I've kind of touched upon this already. Harper, a name in which has lost multiple times. I believe he has an 18-10 record. He's lost to, some good up and coming heavyweights. I believe Nyber, Torres Jr., just to name a couple. And he never really done crazy things. He's on a kind of free streak knockout victory against much lesser opponents, and so there isn't, I believe, any reason for Wilder to fight him. I still think Wilder should retire. In his head, I'm sure he believes that he's going to be able to get back and to be able to become a world champion again, but it's just never, I don't ever see a world in which that happens. Boxing is a crazy world. You never really know what's going to happen, but I just really don't ever think that will happen. But of course, we have to wait and see. Eubank Jr. is set to fight Ben April 26th, and his Excellency's had a busy week, and this is one of the main things in which he's been able to do. I mean, April 26th is seemingly a bit of a confirmed date now, and it's amazing. We're all behind it, and to be honest, I feel like the UK fans are getting more behind Conor Benn as a fighter again. There was a lot of hatred and animosity thrown his way, and to be honest, I don't feel like the fans have been given the justice in which they deserve, the knowledge in which they deserve. But for the most part, it seems like they're getting behind him again and kind of enjoying him again. And this fight is an amazing fight. I'm very glad that they haven't gone down the route of trying to get world belts, because this fight, I believe, has to happen, and then they can go on to try and get world championships. And there is good fights there for world championships, but for the moment, I believe this fight has to happen. And April 26th seems like that's going to be the date, and it seems most likely that is actually going to happen. I'm sure it's going to have a very good undercard as well, being a Riyadh season event, but it's in London. WBC have ordered Jack versus Riziki. Duarte will fight Prograis February 15th. I think that is going to be an excellent fight. But Ballo has joined Top Rank and Overtime. Wilson will rematch Dib March 1st. Hearn has listed Bacoli, White, Wilder, or the winner of Zhang versus Caballel to fight Joshua next. And if you go through them, I mean, Bacoli, that'll probably be in Africa. I'm very much here for that fight, and I don't see why that shouldn't happen. That would be an excellent fight. White, to be honest, I'm still here for that as a rematch. That could be an interesting one. He's not looked excellent in his couple comeback fights, I suppose, but I would still be very much open for that fight. Wilder, like I say, he has to beat Harper, and then possibly that fight can make sense, but that's just a loser's bracket type fight. The winner of Zhang vs Caballero is probably the one that would deserve it the most. But it seems like there is still names floating around that could sell out big for Joshua, and a return or an African fight could be a huge thing, a huge deal for Joshua. Moving on, Heaney will fight Kahati February 8th. Heffron has retired. Somebody I've had the pleasure of interviewing, been able to have great success at the British level, and yeah, just a great name for British boxing. And yeah, sad to see him retired, to be completely honest. Harding will fight February 15th. McCrory is set to fight Richards March 1st. Farrell will rematch Hughes March 1st. Haney may rematch Garcia in October. Like I say, it's been a busy time for His Excellency getting deals done and really trying to get behind just making the fights as quickly as possible and as well as possible. And yeah, for the most part, I believe that this fight is going to probably happen. And in October, it seems like they are both going to fight their own type of fight first. It seems like Haney's going to go down a fight with Ramirez, and Garcia is going to go down a fight with Diaz. It's an interesting one. No, not Diaz, Cruz. But yeah, it's an interesting one to see that they're both probably going to fight on the same fight night. I believe May 14th, like I mentioned, against them two guys, and then they're going to meet in October and actually fight. We've seen that happen a few times where it's just been they're almost fighting and then they aren't. Then one of them loses, and that causes the whole thing to kind of go out the window. Hopefully, that doesn't happen. It might happen, but we'll have to wait and see. Eubank Jr. versus Ben has a rematch clause, so either way, even if Eubank Jr. gets knocked out in the first round, he's still going to get a rematch versus Ben. There's no real surprise that that's in the contract, to be completely honest. After what happened with Eubank Jr. versus Smith, there's no kind of, like I say, real surprise that that is in the contract. But yeah, it is. Panthan, Valdez Jr., Flores, Griffiths, Fuentes, and Meza will fight January 23rd. Spence Jr. versus Fundora isn't happening next. Spence Jr. seemingly is wanting to go down another route or just isn't ready for his return. Even after being out for 2 years, it seems like he isn't ready for his return as of yet. So Fundora is going to have to go away, do his own thing, and I suppose see what happens from there. Really, I mean, Fundora. I suppose there will be other fights available to him. The Crawford one probably won't happen. The Ennis one probably wouldn't happen. Perhaps there is now limited options to an extent for who he could fight next, but we will have to wait and see. Turner will fight Farag March 15th. Collins versus Harris. Brown versus Wilson. Hennigan versus Golding. Mack Brown Jr., Ferguson, Wiggins, Suki, Arkwright, Palmer, Butler, and Francis will fight March 14th. Lozano has joined Queensbury yet again every single week. Queensbury are announcing another signing, and this is a standout amateur from, I believe, Puerto Rico, and so again, a name which isn't just British boxing, trying to cement that they are going to go around for world shows and really try and put on worldwide events again. And I'm so completely here for it. And like I say, signing fighters every single week. Moving on, Smith is in talks to fight McKenna in April. That would be on the Eubank Ben undercard. I think that's a great fight, to be completely honest. I want to see Liam Smith back. He had that poor performance versus Eubank Jr., and he's still stuck around the sport. I feel like he is always going to be around the sport no matter what's going on. But that fight is a good fight. It's an interesting fight. I mean, McKenna's was unfortunate with what happened with the Japanese prize fighter tournament falling through, and he was looking excellent in it. And I think that could be an underrated type matchup, in my opinion. The WBA have ordered Ramirez versus Dorticos, and that's kind of the official ordering now. Seems like that's possibly going to slow down the Optaya versus Ramirez fight, which is a shame. That is the fight in which, for the cruiserweight division, makes sense, and I'm sure that's what everybody wants to see. But Optaya might fight Sin Cara because that mandatory probably is still there, and then Ramirez might fight Dorticos, and if they both get through that, again, that tournament style format, if they both get through that, then they would probably meet possibly in the end of this year in a Riyadh season, most likely a finale fight, which would probably make sense. Lopez is in talks to fight Hitchens. Of course, that's the fight in which Lopez is now chasing after moving away from wanting to fight Matias. I feel like he sees the weaknesses in Hitchens as a fighter, and I suppose, credit to him wanting to go unify the division. It is perhaps a smarter play to do that than to fight Matias because there's more of a reward from fighting him, and I love to see unification fights, so I am still here for that. Moving on, Keating has joined Tasman Fighters. Walker is set to fight Woodstock March 1st. His Excellency wants Lopez versus Ennis in October, so perhaps we will see Lopez versus Hitchens. And then, if he is able to get through that, Lopez versus Ennis in October would be a huge fight. And then they're talking about doing Garcia Haney, the winner of that, to fight Lopez Ennis. There is so much of a deep plan in which His Excellency is putting together, which is, just exciting for the fans. It's really just like dream matchup after dream matchup, and if it is able to all go through, which is likely to be completely honest, it's just amazing because, like I say, we've never had this kind of level of just planning and detailing and fights being talked about way before they could even happen, and His Excellency is just doing that. He's just saying exactly what he wants, and he's just saying that that probably could happen. I mean, he's talked about Nui versus Nick Ball. He's talked about Usyk versus Atoma. He's just mentioning fights, and nobody's ever been able to do that and actually be able to back it up before. And this is actually happening now. And Lopez versus Ennis would be an excellent fight. If he fights Hitchens first, that's another excellent fight. If he goes on to fight the winner of Haney versus Garcia, if he beats Ennis, that's another an amazing fight. They're just all dream matchups, and as a boxing fan, you probably do have to be the most excited, more so than ever, to be completely honest, because of all this going on. It's just amazing to see, like I've said. Haney is set to fight Ramirez in May, like I mentioned. Interesting how it is Ramirez, to be completely honest. Ramirez had that lackluster performance versus Barboza Jr. and did look poor. He could have waited to fight the winner out of Barboza Jr. versus Cattrall. That's not too long away now, and perhaps he could have, like I say, waited to fight the winner of that. But I suppose Ramirez was ready and is perhaps willing to take this fight in May. A Sandor Martin fight could have even happened. That was been talked about happening for a while, but Ramirez has still got the name. He's still a Golden Boy fighter. He still had big moments in his career, but yeah, it's just interesting to see that even though he looked quite poor, he looked quite lackluster. Cruz looked not poor, but he didn't have the best of performances against Valenzuela and, of course, lost. And so for Garcia to fight to him and Haney to fight Ramirez, it's just interesting matchups in my opinion. And that would be a huge still American card from what I believe they're actually going back to America with Riyadh season. Murtazalev has called out to Fundora. Seems like that fight possibly could actually happen now that, like I mentioned, Fundora perhaps doesn't have the greatest of names that he once was kind of being talked about. No more Crawfords, no more Ennis's, no more Spence Juniors. It seems like that probably might be his best option. If he could win that, he picks up another belt. Perhaps it could be classed as an easier fight, and so that could happen. And it's not definitely not going to bring in the same level of money, and it's not going to be as big of a payday as that of Spence Jr., like I mentioned, Crawford or an Ennis fight. But it's still a big fight nonetheless. Moving on, Garcia is set to fight Cruz in May, like I mentioned. Smith Jr. will fight February 13th. Munguia won via unanimous decision versus Siberian. Akhmedov won via KO in round 2 versus Jones. Hiruta won via technical unanimous decision versus Ramirez to remain WBO World Super Flyweight Champion. Trinidad won via unanimous decision versus Plania to remain WBC Continental American Featherweight Champion. And to speak a bit about that card, Akhmedov delivering an excellent KO. He's going to continue to press on, move along into the back, trying to get back to his world ranking fights, world level type fights, and with 360 promotions, I think they are doing an excellent job. Like I've mentioned in that previous prediction video I did of the Haruta fight, I think they're doing an excellent job. I think they're really bringing that attention of boxing onto the UFC Fight Pass and are building themselves as a promotion. And with having UFC Fight Pass and the likes of a Callum Walsh, which is quite a big name. And now they've also got a fighter which is of course coming through, of course progressing well, and looking good at the same time in Trinidad, and also Haruta at the same time, who's an excellent women's fighter. They have got some good names, and this is probably one of their biggest events as of yet. They had some big names show up. It's a Hollywood fight night, so it's in a great position for a fight night to be in. And yeah, Akhmedov looked very good. Haruta again looked very good. Ramirez came in with her head really just making it sloppy. Haruta moved very well. She showed excellent footwork and was just relatively composed. Is pretty much all you have to do against a fighter like Ramirez, when they just kind of try and make it rugged, put their head in places where perhaps it shouldn't be, and just kind of slug it out and not look the best whilst doing it. And Haruta made her look silly. She caused, of course, Ramirez caused a head clash for the most part. And Haruta, I think, is an excellent women's fighter and is hopefully now going to get another world title shot against one of the other champions. I think there is, belts up for grabs in the super flyweight division that she could try and go for. She could try and pick up, and I'm really here to see her progression. I think she could be an excellent Japanese fighter and really build a fan base. And to be honest, there isn't too many big Japanese women's fighters, bar if you're looking like the atomweight division. Other than that, there isn't really too many, so that would be an excellent fighter to really have at a high level and really be pushed, and she seemingly is having that back in now. And then also, like I mentioned, Trinidad, great win versus Planier as well, really getting himself into featherweight rankings. I feel like could be in line for a title shot against one of the champions, if not, eliminator, a final eliminator would not be far away. And I think he's definitely an entertaining fighter who could be around in the featherweight division and maybe have success at world level. Moving on now, um, Little T won via KO in round two uh, versus Afghan Dan. Gareth won via TKO in round 1 versus Hatt. Brooks won via TKO in round 2 versus Gavinio. Hamed won via TKO in round 1 versus Johnson. Mitchell won via KO in round 3 versus Hench. Jade drew versus Shah. Plemons won via an decision versus Warrior. Tail won via KO in round 6 versus Taylor. And, to speak about that Misfits card, to go through my predictions and I suppose what I got right, what I didn't get right. The Little T one, I believe I got that one right, but it was a very, I feel like the standard of actual boxing on this card might have been the lowest in Misfits ever. Honestly, I think it was a lot of the fights were very poor and very just looked quite unsafe. I feel like there's definitely going to be somebody who's going to, at some point cause some serious damage, and it's going to look very bad on Misfits when that does happen. I mean, Dan popped out his shoulder, and you see that a lot in boxing. That's not too crazy of an injury, but the whole fight was bad. Dan turning his back continuously, and Little T was just swinging for the fence. He got absolutely knackered after the first round, and yeah, it was just looking like two very small guys going at it and just swinging haymakers, and Dan just doing spins a lot of the time. He just got spun out realistically, and it squashed their beef to an extent. I think, I don't even know, but it was an interesting fight, and a fight in which I suppose to an extent did kind of revitalise some childhood memories of mine. I didn't do a prediction for it, but the childhood memories being watching Will and E as a kid, and their whole back and forth was entertaining, but I just don't know if there was a need for them to actually fight in the ring or not. Gareth, I got my prediction right, no, wrong, I believe, for that one. I think I said Hat would win, but Hat in the press conference did basically say that he couldn't lift up his arm, and then he proved that because he didn't lift up his, I think it was left arm at all, and he looked like he physically couldn't. I don't actually think he could. And Gareth literally was able to do whatever he wanted, just walked through the little of anything that Hat did have. Brooks versus Gavinio, again, I think I got my prediction right for that one. Gavinio looked awful, head down, just swinging for the fences, then just gave up in round 2. Brooks did well to land some power shots. I feel like definitely could have got him out of there if it had gone any bit longer. Gavinio, like I say, just swinging for the fences, directly looking at the ground. And yeah, that was just a poor fight again. Hamed versus Johnson. I said it would be an easy win for Hamed. It was. Johnson's was a very poor opponent. He came out sprinting towards Hamed, has no resistance punches at all. I feel like there is zero things in which Hamed has learnt from that fight, and there realistically was no point in even having that fight. I know that fighters want to be progressed through journeyman. Even on the Misfit scene, apparently they have to fight journeyman, but the level of journeyman on Misfit so far have been awful, and that continues to be the same. And yeah, it was just very poor. Johnson looked absolutely awful, and yeah, it's just I wasn't impressed, to be honest. Hamid didn't really show anything beyond what he'd already shown in his previous fights. Moving on, that Mitchell fight though, he looked good. I got my prediction right. I thought Hench looked awful, and I thought he was going to look awful. But Mitchell had fun in there, looked good, clearly made himself the better fighter. But yeah, Hench looked terrible. He said he was one of the best fighters on Misfits. He definitely isn't. Far, far from that. With his white collar background, he was still awful. And yeah, Mitchell looked like he looked good, and I would like to see maybe an Idris Virgo type fight for him next. He's actually got good skills, and hopefully will show that at a higher level in the Misfits scene. That Jade versus Shah fight was again poor. I mean, Shah landed kind of one big shot, and that was her kind of whole thing about the fight. Jade just grew into the fight a little bit more, was willing to throw a little bit more. Neither of them looked like they had any much power at all, bar that one shot in which Shah landed, and yeah, it was a draw. I don't really mind if it was a draw or not, to be completely honest. Clemens, though, he made the fight look, the whole card look a little bit better. I got my prediction wrong. I thought that Warrior would win, but Clemens came out really kind of, uh, pull countering very well and using his right hand excellently. But then he got very tired, entered the third and fourth round, and it's expected. It's his first fight, but Warrior was able to not really land too much. Clemens into the later rounds, you could tell he was knackered. You could tell he was struggling to even lift his hands up at the end, and just kind of was just having enough energy to push away Warrior, and that's all he had to do in the end. And yeah, so Clemens getting his first victory in the Misfits scene. Like I mentioned in my predictions video, he could definitely build himself up as a big fighter and a big name. Perhaps he'll fight HS next. We will have to wait and see. Moving on, the Till fight though. Till looked very good, and I'd got my prediction wrong. I thought Taylor was going to be able to come in, smother him, and really cause him problems, but I think Taylor just took an early shot and just really didn't want to be in there. It was a big weight difference. I didn't quite realise it was as big as much as it was. But yeah, it definitely was that, and you could tell that from the get go, Taylor was nervous to really go in too much and to really do too much. And yeah, for the most part, Till just had a lot of success. Taylor was basically just leaning in from way too far out, wasn't actually on rushing him because he kept getting caught with the uppercut when he did, and he got dropped impressively by the uppercut when he did. Till was funny on the mic afterwards, just calling out everybody, like going crazy at everybody like he often does. And he said that he can't help himself. That's his character. That's what makes him entertaining. And yeah, that was a good impressive win for him, a good kind of statement win onto the Misfit scene, and I think there are some huge fights available for him. I saw the views that he's getting on just his highlights alone, 1 million views. He's going to attract big names back into the Misfit scene, which is what Misfits needed, to be completely honest. Moving on now to the MMA news. Oh, no, sorry, there was a bit more boxing news. My apologies. Rodriguez won via TKO in round 1 versus Caravaggio. Patricio won via unanimous decision versus Vega. Tinarello won via TKO in round 1 versus Howard. Haywood won via KO in round 1 versus Patino. Norrie won via unanimous decision versus Anderson. Patricio won via TKO in round 3 versus DeCamp. Elliott won via TKO in round 1 versus Wilson. Cruz won via TKO in round 2 versus Nayert. Outlaw won via stoppage in round 1 versus Burgos. Brown won via unanimous decision versus Silgado. And Prenga won via TKO in round 2 versus Torres. The main thing that I wanted to talk about was the fact that Brown won via unanimous decision. She's now probably next in line to fight Sky Nicholson, and that probably will happen. Moving on now to the MMA news, and so Edwards versus Della Maddalena, Kavanagh versus Dos Santos, Fletcher versus Louron, and Herbert versus Padilla will fight March 22nd. That is the UFC London fight night. It's looking like it's a good fight night, and I'm entertained. I'm here for it already. Every kind of London card I'm going to be here entertained for, ready for. And I feel like the Edwards versus Della Maddalena fight is going to be an underrated fight, to be completely honest. I think Della Maddalena is a very good fighter, and I think Edwards is going to have problems, and you can't underestimates Della Maddalena as a fighter. He's been really waiting for this big opportunity to get into a kind of highly ranked contendership fight. He's been talked about fighting a lot of guys, but it's not actually happened. Now he's been given this opportunity. If he is able to win here, then it's a huge win for him and a statement victory in his career. And so this is a big opportunity for him, and I think he has a real good chance. And so, we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Wood versus Sharia will fight March 22nd. That's also on this card. Holm has left the UFC, so after the 10 years, I believe, in which she's had in the UFC and some great moments, she has now left the UFC. She's coming off a couple bad defeats, and she's definitely not looking like the fighter in which she once was. And she has been a pioneer for women's UFC, but for the most part, at this point, it's kind of fair that she has left the UFC. Will she go into a boxing route? We'll have to wait and see. She hasn't actually officially retired, so we will have to wait and see. Perhaps she will, like I mentioned, go down that boxing route. Crosby has joined BKFC. That is an NFL player kind of announcing that. I don't know if he's actually going to be fighting or if he's like a brand ambassador. I'm not too sure. Freire has been released from the PFL. Hardwick will fight Garcia March 21st. Makhachev versus Sarukian was cancelled. It was a shame Sarukian pulling out the day before on the weigh-ins due to, I believe, some sort of back injury. And yeah, it's meant a lot. It means that Dana White has said that he's not going to get a title fight opportunity next. Chandler has called him out. Perhaps he will fight Chandler next because, I feel like he doesn't mind having, because he's still quite young. He's, I believe, 28 for a UFC champion or for a UFC top contender. He is young, so I'm sure he doesn't mind having to go through another fight to be able to prove himself to get back to that point. But it just shows the business in which the UFC are in. They're not messing about. They're going to cut you if you mess them about and you don't end up fighting, even if it is for an injury that's no fault of your own. And it was a big fight, and it was cancelled. It meant that Moicano vs Dariush was cancelled, and Dariush didn't get an opponent, so I think he got paid without that. I'm not too sure, but it was a huge fight to get cancelled. But of course, Moicano stepped up on very late notice. Makhachev, you got to give him the credit as well because he's taken both Volkanovski on, I believe, a week's notice and Moicano on a day's notice. So to do that as a champion, he's cemented himself as a champion, taking on all comers, no matter really where they are in the rankings. He just wants to fight. The UFC lightweight division is struggling to get him matchups. There isn't too many huge matchups in which fighters he's already fought. He probably will fight Oliveira next, and now he's not going to fight Sarukian next. It's a rematch with Oliveira, and so the Moicano one was just, I suppose, a bit of something different, a bit of a surprise for the UFC fans. Weidman has retired. Of course, he had that one moment versus Anderson Silva, which was a big, shocking, surprising victory. But it's fair enough that he retired after that last contest of his. Pereira versus Ankalaev and Gaethje versus Hooker will fight on March 8th. I think they're two excellent fights. When I did my UFC fights in which I want to see in 2025, Pereira versus Ankalaev was one of them fights, and I'm very glad to see it actually happen. There was a lot of kind of talks that it wasn't actually going to happen, but the rankings are there for the reason. You have to make it happen, and they've abided by that, and he's actually going to fight him. And every Pereira fight's always entertaining, and you're going to want to tune in, and I'm sure you will, for this fight. And then Gaethje versus Hooker, again, gonna be another entertaining fight. Of course, Gaethje, how's he going to recover after being knocked out that badly versus Holloway? And even just his ego as well, how's he going to be able to bounce back from that? But Hooker is going to be an absolute slugger. He's on a great run of form. If he wins this fight, he's back into the top contention of the division, and that's huge for him. That's something in which, if you looked at a few fights ago, you would never have expected. And his turnaround has been excellent, and he has another chance to prove himself against Gaethje. Peligan has been inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. I believe he's one of the original workers to get involved with the Contender Series, I believe, and did some excellent work in the UFC. I think he's passed away, so rest in peace. Very, very great person involved in the UFC, and now has the plaudits by being inducted into the Hall of Fame. White has said, like I mentioned, Sarukian won't have a title shot next. Ulan Bekov won via unanimous decision versus Carpenter. Sopaj won via unanimous decision versus Tercios. Guforov won via unanimous decision versus Nakamura. Perez won via unanimous decision versus Rosa. Dawson won via unanimous decision versus Ferreira. Guzkov won via submission round 2 versus Elikana. Koev won via KO in round 1 versus Reese. Barcelos won via unanimous decision versus Talbot. Derrida won via submission in round 1 versus Holland. Almeida won via KO in round 1 versus Spivak. Prohaska won via KO in round 3 versus Hill. Dvalishvili won via unanimous decision versus Nurmagomedov to remain UFC bantamweight champion. Makhachev won by submission in round 1 versus Moicano to remain UFC lightweight champion. And to speak a bit more about this card as a whole, to be honest, still very good card, very entertaining card for what it was, even though it was made that bit weaker by the main event change, and it still had some interesting moments. I mean, the shocking moment of Talbot losing, he had such good momentum, and everybody was getting really behind him, and everybody was here for the win. He shaved his hair off, and his grappling was exposed, and he's shown that he couldn't deal with the physical strength of that of a more experienced fighter, which is what happens a lot. I mean, you've seen it happen to Raul Rosas. It doesn't mean he's out of it. It means he can definitely still climb back and get back, but he's going to have to work hard to be able to do that. And I feel like his wrestling and grappling game and his physical strength is going to have to improve. I think he's going to have to stop just circling to the right all the time, and he's definitely going to have to make some changes. I think he is a great fighter on the feet, but his confidence definitely is going to take a knock for a young fighter. That could be detrimental. We will have to wait and see. Derrida, that submission round 1 was surprising. To be honest, I thought that Holland would be able to win after the first fight versus Mearshot. For Derrida, he really did look poor, but as soon as Holland gets taken to the ground, 9 times out of 10, against a high level fighter, he's probably going to lose because he just doesn't have the best of ground games, and he seems to always get submitted in the first round if he is going to get submitted. And again, that is the case. Derrida proving himself against a well respected fight in the UFC rankings, in which he definitely had to do, like I say, after that debut UFC performance of his. Almeida, that win for him was a surprising one. That KO in round 1 versus Spivak. Spivak has fought at a very high level, and Almeida has been seen as a bit more of a boring heavyweight who's just going to grapple a bit more. But I feel like maybe he went out there to really prove a statement and to get that knockout victory. I'm not too sure, but I feel like that's definitely raised his stock quite a lot. And in the heavyweight division, in which is looking quite lackluster at the moment, Almeida could be a bit more of a shining light than people really expected. Prochazka, that KO in round 3 versus Hill, I got my prediction right for that one. That was a dramatic KO. I mean, Hill did well to not get knocked out in the first round. Prohaska back to his awkward antics in which we're used to seeing from him, but actually was moving his head and looking a lot more improved in that defensive side of things and just blocking every shot of his head, which was amazing to see, to be honest. He definitely has the power to be able to cause a lot of fights, a lot of problems, and he did that very well versus Hill, and yeah, managed to get a big knockout in the end. Perhaps he got caught with a couple shots against Hill, but Hill, like I say, I think he was too slow, wasn't able to react the same way that Prohaska was, kept falling for Prohaska's slips in which he was doing, and yeah, it was just a very good knockout win for Prohaska. Perhaps he could now go on to fight the winner of Blachowicz versus Ulberg. I think that would be an excellent fight to make. And then if he wins that, he's back in title contention again. So he's definitely still amongst it. But Hill now, how much is he going to be able to ever get back to the top in which he once was? I doubt it. He's said a lot about Alex Pereira, but I just don't see that he's actually going to be able to fight him again. Moving on, of course, Dvalishvili, that unanimous decision versus Nurmagomedov. I got my prediction wrong for that one. I really was rooting for Dvalishvili, and I was really hoping that he would win, and to see him win and the way that he did it, full credit to him. To be able to beat Nurmagomedov is almost unheard of, to be completely honest, and Nurmagomedov, he really did do his family name proud and didn't look bad at all. The first 2 rounds he was pretty much dominating, to be completely honest, but Dvalishvili stuck to his game plan. He stuck to what he knew. He knew that he could just really utilize his gas tank supremely, and it's just an entertaining fight. I feel like he is underestimated for his entertainment ability at the same time. I feel like people just see his wrestling and class him as a boring fighter, but that was the most high skilled wrestling in which I've ever seen from two fighters, and just the way that in the end he was able to just have fun and still score takedowns versus Nurmagomedov, and just the way that he was able to keep standing up at certain times and have fun taunting, it was just unheard of against Nurmagomedov. Even though it was a close fight, and we would probably like to see a rematch. Maybe Nurmagomedov will fight O'Malley, and then the Dvalishvili will fight Jan, and then the winner of that will fight each other. Probably that could be the case, but I wouldn't mind if they went straight into a rematch. Like I mentioned, Nurmagomedov did nothing bad to his name. It's a loss, and it's very rare to see from Nurmagomedov. But still, he fought very well, showed a lot of skill. Just it's very, very, very difficult to be able to match the gas tank in which Dvalishvili has, and of course now he's broken the record at the same time for Saint Pierre with the most UFC takedowns. And yeah, it's just sensational to see. I believe he's on 11, 12 fight win streak in the UFC, which is just, yeah, excellent. And he's finally getting the plaudits in which he deserves. And then Makhachev, that win, submission in round one, I feel like that's what he had to do. That's what he had to go out there and prove a point and show why he was pound for pound number one. If it was, it could have very easily been a scrappy, unanimous decision that he didn't look too amazing in, and then people would have been questioning his pound for pound rankings. But he faced number 5 in the rankings. He went and he got him out of there in the first round via submission. He got caught with a shot, and then, like I say, it could have been a difficult fight. But as soon as he got into the ground, Moicano tried to get up, made that little mistake, which was only a split second, but Makhachev straight away was on it and was able to capitalise on that little error, and then gets a submission very early on. And excellent. It's what Alex Pereira didn't do to Roundtree. He wasn't able to get that early knockout. It was a lot harder than he expected it to be, and that was against 8th ranked fighter in the division, Makhachev, proving why he's pound for pound number one, and an excellent performance. And so, yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you didn't, like the video, subscribe if you are new, and thanks for watching.